when you work in a place like the Museum of Modern Art in New York, you get a lot of rejection. I mean, you get a lot of rejection in life in general, but as a curator of contemporary design, sometimes you are a little bit ahead of what the thinking about the art world is. So you make proposals and you get rejections. I have a necklace of rejected exhibitions that I could show in a jewelry store. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is a rejected exhibition proposal that became a WordPress site, that then became a MoMA site, that then became a book, and now is becoming an exhibition. So in true post-digital fashion, we were able to turn a rejection into what will become a show, actually at the Science Gallery in Dublin. And it has to do with the idea of violence. I'm sure that all of you are thinking of violence a lot in many different facets of your life. You're thinking of violence when it comes to the terrorism that is happening in the world right now. You're thinking of violence when it comes to the immigration crisis. You're thinking of violence when it comes to video games and women. You're thinking of violence when it comes to very simply working in life and living your life and encountering it every day. And of course, you counter this violence with a new type of attitude towards the world, with a new sort of behavior. But sometimes violence comes in so many different aspects that they're almost hard to recognize. And that's what the project that I would like to discuss with you today deals with. It all started about 3 weeks ago. Do you remember when the 3D printed gun project was announced? It was quite a shock to me. You know, I've always been working, yes, here we go. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Do you have it? Perfect. So my presentation is constrain, hack, annihilate, or stun, the singular relationship between design and violence. So I was mentioning to you about 3 years ago, the 3D printed gun got announced, and I remember how stunned I was by the idea that something as benign as design and as life-changing as open source could be turned on its head and become a way for everyone to have lethal power printing at home. Lethal power for sure. And at the same time, the book by Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Our Nature, was published. Steven Pinker is a really great scholar. He's at Harvard. I would never argue with him. But he was saying that our society is becoming less violent. So 3D printed gun, Steven Pinker, big question mark in my mind. And so I did what I usually do. I tried to understand better the relationship between violence and society today using design objects as a lens. Violence has changed tremendously. You know, war has changed. Once upon a time, soldiers were warriors. Today, they're sometimes ethnographers and anthropologists. This is a manual that enables soldiers to communicate with people all over the world using sign language almost. Weapons have changed. You know, there are non-lethal weapons that are in use right now, and this is just one of them, you know, sound weapons. Vladimir Gavro was the inventor in the 1950s, and that's what sonic weaponry looks like right now. So things have changed a lot. And in the meantime, designers, are they so cynical as to think that weapons can be an item of decoration? This is the horrible lamps that Philippe Starck designed a few years ago using AK-47s and other weapons for bedside table lamps, which doesn't surprise me when I see really thoughtful designers like Alessandro Mendini showing chairs burning in the mountains. Sometimes we have to kill design in order for it to be reborn and truly be helpful. There's a beautiful phrase that Victor Papanek wrote in the 1970s. He said that there are professions that are more harmful than industrial design, but only very few of them. I didn't think about it before. I always thought that design was positive and constructive, but design can be evil. And I sorted out my ideas by looking at the past. You see here George Nelson, one of the most famous designers in history, the designer of the marshmallow sofa, of the beautiful clocks that are cute and decorative and are produced by Vitra. Well, in the late 1950s, George Nelson produced a CBS video that was broadcast everywhere on how to kill people. And he said that killing people was a problem of design. Of course, there was sarcasm and subtlety behind this title, but you know what? If you watch it, and it's online on YouTube, it shows you how design can actually be an instrument for evil, for destruction, for power, and for control. I started making a list of objects that have an ambiguous relationship with violence. When I say objects, I don't mean only chairs, lamps, and devices. I also mean posters, I also mean interfaces, I mean the architecture of prisons, and I kind of organize them in this instinctive way: stun, explode, penetrate, manipulate. It's amazing what happens when you close your eyes and you start creating a taxonomy of violence. And together with my co-curator, Jamer Hunt, we set out to propose an exhibition to MoMA. MoMA turned down the exhibition. They didn't understand, or they maybe were afraid of putting this kind of non-pretty, non-positive design on display. And I understand it. It's the Museum of Modern Art. The idea of modern is synonym with progressive, with good, with constructive. So what you do when you get a rejection and you don't want to ask anybody's permission or money is you start a WordPress site. And that's what we did. Every week, we would publish a different object, and you see them here. They range from technicals, the four-wheel drives that have become synonym with guerrilla and terrorism all over the world, the refugee project that kind of maps all the refugee camps in the world, the anti-pirate water cannon, or the box cutter, which has become the symbol of 9/11, even though nobody ever knew if it was really used by the terrorists that destroyed the World Trade Center, or the stiletto heel, the 3D printed gun itself. And every time, every week, we would call in a favor. We would find somebody really famous and really friendly, somebody who loved us, to write a small essay. And the first people to say yes were William Gibson, God bless him, the most generous person in the world, the great science fiction writer, and Camille Paglia, a very well-known sociologist in the United States who chose to work on the stiletto heel. So these big names called in other favors, and only relying on our goodwill and on the goodwill of others, we created this amazing website. You see, the AK-47 was commented upon by an ex-child soldier from Sierra Leone, China Keitezi. Mountaintop removal, mining practices as violence on the earth, or female genital mutilation awareness posters. And the commenter in that case was Angélique Kidjo, the great musician from Benin, who's also an activist for women's stands in Africa and in other parts of the world. You can imagine, this project lasted a year and a half, and it really put together amazing examples. I'm going to show you here Hack Infect. You see here the work of Choka Fai, who invented a machine that forces your body to move in certain ways because of electrical impulse, so you can do a 3D printing choreography with your own body. It's like really this idea of hacking, infecting. But hacking sometimes is also hacking objects. I remember seeing all these objects, all these protests in Turkey, and I saw that protesters were spraying soap into each other's eyes. They were using the soap bottles, and only later did I realize they were actually spraying milk, which is to counteract tear gas. So that's a hacking of an object that already exists. Hacking is also taking new synthetically produced viruses and that are going to be used for cancer treatment, and instead hacking them to infect the president's DNA, a dystopian, almost sci-fi novel that was written by Andrew Hessel, who's the scientist at Autodesk that actually designed this particular synthetic virus. And then you have Constrain. What you see here in that picture is a non-lethal weapon. It's basically instantly solidifying foam that is used by armies. It's still under testing right now to immobilize enemies. But constraining is also prison design. And you see here on the top, design of prisons in Norway. That's the famous prisons when Anders Breivik is actually held prisoner. And below instead, a maximum security prison in the United States. The two different attitudes towards constraining and keeping out of society. And constraint is also bonding, and it's also S&M, and in this case, it's this beautiful video and contraption by a South African designer, Leni van der Weyer. Stun. Stunning is a very simple form of violence, and you see here the speculative project by Andrew Friend, which is a contraption that enables you to feel the whole brunt of a lightning without dying. So there's just enough distance between you and the lightning so you feel it, but you're not dead. So it's about experiencing violence sometimes. And in some cases, it's absolutely functional, like an anti-pirate water cannon that has been used in the Strait near Somalia, where so much piracy is happening. Another form of violence is penetration, very simply, doesn't get any more instinctual than that. And in this case, we studied several bullets, among them the green bullets that are currently being tested by the government of the United States. They're lead-free, so they're safe for the environment. You'll be dead, but the environment will be fine. And manipulate, control, wrestle. Many of us hear all the time about design thinking. I have some problems with it, but it's an interesting way to talk about design. Well, you might not know that the government of the United States actually applies design thinking to warfare and publishes manuals about it. And in this case, we had a really great colonel from West Point, who's also a philosopher, that wrote the essay about this piece. And female genital mutilation is another form of control and manipulation, as we well know. And what you see here is a beautiful poster by Volontaire, a company in the Netherlands, that was done for Amnesty International to raise awareness about female genital mutilation. Intimidate, the promise of death, is another way to be violent. You see here some tongue-in-cheek example, two handbags. One is, I'm gonna cut your head off, and the other one, don't even come close because I have lethal weapons in my bag. Of course, these are completely tongue-in-cheek, but instead the work of James Bridle, who goes around the world in places like Washington, D.C. or Brighton, England, and tapes on the floor the shadow of a drone to make people in the Western world feel the same feeling that somebody in Pakistan or in Afghanistan might have when they see a drone coming by, is another form of intimidation. It's not very different from what we saw before, a sensor to enable one to feel what other people feel. And of course, the ultimate form of violence, explode, annihilate visibly and completely. And you see here the work of Masoud Hassani, that is a landmine detonator that is based on his experience as a young Afghani growing up in a zone with many landmines. And you see, in this case, violence is to a good end. What is amazing amongst all these different objects is that they always have an ambiguous relationship with violence. They might look violent, but be de-violent. And in other cases, it's the opposite. The ultimate violence is, of course, the death penalty, at least to me. I've been living in the United States for 22 years. I'm a true believer in New York, and I'm a New Yorker. But every time I hear about the death violence, I cannot believe my ears. And I wanted to talk about it. Every week, we would not only publish the object and the essay, we would also ask the public a question. And it was amazing what we were able to get back in terms of answers and comments to those questions, something that we would not have been able to do in the galleries. The kind of dialogue that you can have online does not happen in a gallery. So in a way, it was better that we were rejected as an exhibition. So when it came to the box cutter, we asked people which other invisible everyday objects can become lethal weapons, and we had so many different responses. By the way, you can still go online and see all this. And you see the different questions. They were serious questions. We talked about execution. Is execution always ugly? Is euthanasia a form of violence or a form of compassion? What other secretive acts carried out on behalf of the public need to be made more visible? These are the questions that we ask ourselves in our everyday life, the questions that relate to politics, relate to globalism, relate to the troubles we're going through. It's amazing to be able to use a platform like a museum and a platform as global as the Museum of Modern Art to ask these questions. the Serpentine Ramp, which is the redesign of the slaughterhouse by Temple Grandin, brought in more than 150 comments. The essay was written by Ingrid Newkirk, who's the president of PETA, and the question was, can we redesign a violent act to be more humane? That was a real debate and a really passionate one. Or when it came to euthanasia, the object is this beautiful euthanasia roller coaster. Of course, it's a speculative project designed by Julie Jonas Urbonas, who is a Lithuanian that worked in a roller coaster manufacturing company for 5 years, so he knows what he's talking about. And he devised a roller coaster that has spires that deprive your brain progressively of more and more oxygen until at the end of the roller coaster you're dead. So the idea is to kill yourself. It's a suicide with elation. Of course, it's provocative, and it's amazing that we got answers, for instance, by a person that had a terminal illness and that had very serious pain, who said, you know what, sometimes the real violence is not death, is the pain that you have to go through. Well, you know what, this is what I want to do in a museum. I want to talk about the death penalty. The final post was about the death penalty, and it was written by Ricky Jackson, who was held in death row in the south of the United States for 30 years before he was completely exonerated because he was innocent. And he wrote about what it means to have this sword dangling above your head all the time. Of course, MoMA in the end saw that it was a good project, decided to put it on its own website, and finally published a book which came out last year. And also from the online experience, we decided to have many different outbursts. For instance, we had 4 great Oxford-style debates. I urge you all to use this format for public speaking. It's fantastic. You take 2 great people and a motion, and you have them argue with some rules and some moderation. It turns out to be fantastic. So the 3 debates were about open source, about designing empathy, about eating animals, and then there was a 4th one about the open source internet. So the first one was based on the 3D printed gun. And as I mentioned to you, it's also interesting when you design the motion so that it's not black or white. So it was not about gun control. It was about open source. So the motion was, should we support open source in any case, even if it leads to letting people print guns at home? And the 2 arguers were, on one side, Cody Wilson, who is the designer of the 3D printed gun, who is an amazing thinker. He can really put a wall of words in front of you and quote all the philosophers in the world. But on the other side, I had Rob Walker, who's a fantastic writer who looks like a crypto-anarchist himself. So it was very interesting to see the nuances. And the debate notion was, we cannot limit open source design even when we do not support the consequences. Then we also had an audience that voted at the beginning and at the end of the debate, and the winner was not the one that had more votes. It was the one that was able to change the balance of the vote during the course of the debate. The second one had as an object prompt a menstruation machine, which is a contraption to enable men to feel what it means to have a period. It has electrodes that give you shock on the lower abdomen, so you get cramps, and you have a reservoir in the back. You're supposed to put your own blood in it, and then it gets delivered between your legs. So it's the full experience. And the debate motion was, design's potential to transcend gender boundaries is limitless. The third one was about killing animals, and it was design can allow us to humanely include animal products in our diet. And for that particular case, what I discovered is that the vegan community is really dangerous. So we had so many calls before that I had to increase security at the museum before this. Yeah. The 4th one that I'm really, really proud of was about the internet, and the 2 debaters were Larry Lessig and Biella Coleman. And the debate motion was, internet freedom and digital privacy will come about only through the design of better tools for civil disobedience and direct action. See the ambiguity? Larry Lessig, who believes in the open internet, argued against this motion because he believes that even if our government is really, really failing and weak, still we need to legislate and to believe in a civil society. And Biella Coleman, who is actually the biographer between quotes of Anonymous and a wonderful scholar, argued for. As I mentioned to you, this project, which started out completely digital, will become an exhibition at the Science Gallery in Dublin in September. And this is something that we offer to everyone for elaboration, for continuation. It's in the open. It's open source, as violence is. And only by acting and thinking about it as a community will we ever be able to do something about it. Thank you very much.